And we're recording this session. Obviously, Peter's the moderator, and the rules of war are that we will always use respect and courtesy, but you can criticize the hell out of me as much as you like. I'm happy for that. So don't feel apologetic, guys, when you get in that mood of wanting to challenge. That's how we learn. That's how I learn. That's how you'll learn. I don't think I've ever had a class where somebody hasn't argued, so I expect war to end up being the same. And that's great. There will be diverging opinions and there'll be converging opinions. And if out of it all you come away saying, oh, I've got it right and Mark's got it wrong, well, that's a great outcome for the night. If we come out with it with something better between the two of us, then that's a fantastic outcome for the night. So please feel comfortable with that. So yes, we're looking at how the Standard Australia Standard drives things, essentially. And it's not a document that's perfect, and we acknowledge that. There's some technical errors in there. There's some referencing errors. There's some things that are missing. For example, we don't talk about anything to do with the timing of work. So I'm assuming that pruning roots on a deciduous tree in late autumn, early winter is nowhere near as problematic as pruning roots on the same tree during bud burst. Would we agree on that?
Yep.
Yeah, good. Okay, I thought I might have had some argument on that one. So, and it's interesting, a lot of what we do with the Australian Standard and how it got to where it is fascinating. We used to have a British Standard. That was the real first one that came out. The British Standard was revised. The Americans said, yes, look, that's great, but 10 times trunk diameter, you know, if we have a 10-inch diameter tree, that's 100 inches. Oh, I've got to work that back to feet. That's going to be hard. Let's just make it 1 inch to 1 foot. And in doing that, we immediately increased the protection area by 44%. Think about that. 10 times, 12 times, 10 times 100, 12 times 12 is 144. So 44% increase. And the interesting thing is, trees in Northern America, the cooler part of America, the USA I'm talking about there, sorry, I should be clear, and trees in England have less desirable conditions for root development than trees in tropical Queensland, for example. So we've applied a really harsh condition. And the great thing about that from our point of view, the standards point of view, is that as arborists, we really shouldn't be getting things wrong. We've got lots and lots and lots of fat there. And you probably have all noticed at some stage or other, you've written a report, you said you can't do this, you go back to the site, they've done almost everything wrong. And if you're old like me, 20 years later, you go back past the site and you say, damn, it was a shame that tree didn't die. They would have proved to him I was right. And so a lot of builders and developers have learned as a result of sometimes our concerns that we're often wrong. And certainly I fit into that category both ways. There've been times when I thought, there's just no way this tree is going to die. And I can think of a wonderful one where everything was right. It was just one of those sites. I went out and photographed it. This is the way it should happen. And about 6 months after they started the project, the damn thing got hit by lightning. You know, you never know what's going to happen in the end. So we've got an Australian standard, and the purpose of the standard is what? Anyone want to have a guess at it?
Give us something to work with.
Yeah, something to work with. Yeah. What's the aim? What are we? Why? It's an opportunity to give arborists work. Is that the
Tree preservation?
Protecting trees on development site.
Yeah, protecting trees on development site. Trying to make sure that at the end, what we retain is healthy, viable, and is going to be something that is going to contribute to the landscape for some time. What we don't want is trees that are dead, trees that are dying, trees that have gone into a spiral of decline, or trees that are structurally screwed up. So that's the aim of it. Who's our target audience of these documents? Is there more than one document, I guess is a good question.
There's a range of stakeholders that are interested in that. They include the property owner and the developer, the builder, the government authority, or anybody that's got an interest in it.
Yeah, neighbouring people. So it's a difficult document because you've got lots of different parties, all that we're communicating to. We're not communicating to just one of them, but all of them. So it's of the reports that we write, it's probably one of the most frustrating from my side, because I'm never quite sure where the limits are. So I'm just sort of getting Michael into the stage where he's ready and warmed up to have a how come. So the first stage, I guess, is we're going to go out and do the assessment. We've got that fine. We'll do that separately, but we're going to communicate a preliminary assessment back to somebody. And in that case, it's usually the design team. That's what the standard says it's for. It's the design team. So that document's going to be very different than your final arboricultural impact assessment report, even though it may be contained in your arboricultural impact assessment report. It'll include things like the tree ID. Now, here's an interesting thing. Who here uses the words health, vigor, and vitality the same?
I use health and vigor, but then if a tree, and I say a tree can be healthy, although not vigorous.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd say a Ficus macrophylla is a vigorous tree. Camphor is a vigorous tree. London Plains a vigorous tree. That is, its genetics make it well adapted. A tree is healthy is it growing currently well, and vitality is its potential. So you could have a tree, for example, that's just lost all of its leaves through hail or possum grazing, might have been the first hit from possums, and it could have good vitality, but be in poor health. Elm leaf beetle does that for some of you in the southern ends of the world. So they're not the same word. It's interesting, the Australian standard has decided to adopt them all as the same. And that's one of the suggestions I know Arborist has for a change to the standard, is to make sure that those three words are defined separately so that we can better communicate. Look, this is a vigorous tree with good vitality, but it's in poor health. With some care, it could go back to being a tree that's got good health. Or this is a tree that's got good vigor, and therefore will be tolerant of construction more so than a tree with poor vigor.
So would that be consistent with Shigo's definitions?
Yeah. So we've essentially said, let's adopt Shigo's definitions for that very reason. There's some similarities between them, but they're not quite the same. So a preliminary tree assessment is about gathering that information and communicating it to the design team. And they'll want to know things like trunk diameter. Can they calculate out tree protection zones? What do you reckon?
Yes. It's a basic formula. It's 12 times DVH. Anyone who's got a measuring tape can calculate that.
And if you're dealing with the average design team, do you think the average design team can draw it on a plan in CAD in a quarter of the time that I've ever got a chance to do it?
Yes, they should be able to. I'm hopeless at CAD and I can do it. So if they're trained in CAD, they should be able to do it better than me.
I bow to your superiority. I give up on it. It's just horrid. So yes, exactly. They can just do it so quickly. So again, we need to give them the critical information. There are times when there is information there that we collect that I wonder whether we need to collect it. And that'll be an interesting discussion for the committee, for the Standards Australia committee. But do I really need to know the height of the tree in most cases? What do you think?
Not usually, but it's fun to collect that.
It's fun. Okay. Shane, when would height be critical from your side?
When you're trying to put it in a basement. Height, I think right height's probably not something you could necessarily, you could get away with not collecting. Canopy width, though, is something that you would not be able to leave off your data collection.
Yeah, look, a canopy width, and again, canopy width is one of those things that my view is, James, you want to say something, so unblock your mic. I
was just going to say, in the ACT, tree height determines whether a tree is protected or not, which can be pretty important information for a designer to know if that tree is going to have to stay or if it could just be felled. So
the critical issue there is not whether the height of the tree, but whether the height allows it to be classified as a protected tree.
Yeah, and ACT, once a tree hits a certain height, it's not protected. And in my experience, if it's not protected, it disappears pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that sounds reasonable. If it's not protected, one of the things that I would tell a developer, if it wasn't a particularly great tree, would be get rid of it before you put your DA in and simplify the equation. It's like a game of chess, you know, when you can simplify it and just keep down to the main players. But my view is, again, sometimes those trees that aren't protected are really valuable trees to look at protecting and communicating that back. I think we've got to be aware that, you know, we need to do more than just aim at trying to get a development approved. Our job is to try and end up with the best outcome we possibly can as far as trees go, without being necessarily obstructive or unnecessarily obstructive.
So instead of worrying about measuring trees, then perhaps it might be more useful to put trees into height categories.
Yeah, look, I think one of the advantages of height is that it allows another person looking at the site to get an idea. Oh, yes, tree 7 is 6 metres and tree 8 is 9 metres and tree 10 is 12 metres. Well, you know, they should be 3 different heights, even if they turn out to be 7, 9 and 11 metres high. They should be proportionately different in height.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Should they be measured? It's interesting. I remember going to a lecture by Craig Hinton, and Craig said estimating tree height's one of the things that arborists do the worst.
I've got a hypsometer, so I do measure them to an extent, but once I've measured a few on a site, then I tend to estimate the rest of them.
I think getting some basic dimensions is pretty important. And also the canopy spread is important when you've got, you know, looking down the track when there's the development's going on, the machinery working under the trees and plants like that. So
you've got to calculate your landscape significance and retention value, and that all comes from your volumes.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. We'll get onto landscape significance value in a few more minutes, but just looking at a development, in many cases, the trees that we're assessing, and again, I don't know, it might be very different in other states, but in New South Wales and Sydney, I'll tend to get 9 out of 10 times, I won't get to do a preliminary tree assessment. 9 out of 10 times, I'll get a finished design, and then they need an arborist report. And I'll be able to get some design tweaks done, but seldom will I be able to get major design changes done at those stages. Is that the same for other people elsewhere? Do I see David with thumbs up?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can say working in Melbourne, more and more architects are getting me to do a preliminary report and tell them what the TPZs are before they start on the design. More and more often that happens.
I get it probably once or twice a year. I get to do a preliminary where it's truly no design has started. You know, they've just got a basic concept they're going to put something on. And they're often the hardest things for me to do because, you know, then I've got to ask what the significance is and how you figure that out. And that's a really interesting question. What is the significance of something? Is it the significant because it's endemic? Is it significant because it's a native tree? Is it significant because it's a big tree? Is it significant because it's visually apparent from the street or neighbouring properties? What makes significance?
All of those things. All of those things do.
All those things do, yes. So, and then, you know, this is how do you measure them type thing. And so we come up with a whole pile of somewhat subjective processes for dealing with that. And I'm not sure that we necessarily need to be precise. One of the things I am certain of is if I go out and say a tree is significant, Shane might not argue with me, but if I go out and say a tree is not significant and Shane thinks it is, he will argue with me. Is that a fair comment, Shane?
We would have a very polite conversation, Mark. We would never argue.
Sorry.
I think in that, and we talked a little bit about this before you turned up, different states, different regional council areas have different regulations in relation to development. Victoria is slightly different to New South Wales, and I'm not too sure how it differs to other states, but our planning controls say these that if you need to ask the local government authority for approval, the planning scheme sets out what the answer should be to the application, and when that includes tree controls, the neighbourhood character influences the decisions and any protection overlays. So we could have trees that are seen as significant insofar as the way they contribute to the amenity of the area, but aren't protected because the neighbourhood character says we love these type of trees, but there's no protection over them. Then we can have other areas where the trees are protected by an overlay, but the neighbourhood character doesn't say much about trees. And so I think it's possibly starting to go, well, it's a little bit outside the purview of the arborist to explain the importance of trees against the decision-making regulations.
I guess, Shane, my point is that if I tell you the tree's not significant and you think it is, as a consent authority, the tree's significant. So I'm not there telling you how to suck eggs. I'm just suggesting that this should be significant or this may not be significant. But I think we'd agree that the trees that aren't significant, and that's where I always say to start off with, is the things that aren't significant are trees that are dead and have no habitat value, trees that are invasive weed species, trees that are in a state of decline, an irreversible state of decline. Those trees are usually the ones that there's little point in doing anything to retain. So usually every now and again we'll get a habitat tree that gets retained that's dead, but in most cases they're the goners. And then endemic trees, larger trees, trees that have high street appeal tend to get given the highest priority for whatever thing. So there's no blanket rule, and there's a number of different systems that have been looked at. There's TRIZ, SHRIV, SUL. It's not etched in black and white. It's simply trying to come up with some way of consistently doing it. And my view of it is, whatever system you want, just make sure you've communicated how you've got there so that the reader knows how you've determined significance. And it's not black and white. I could say a tree is not significant, and Shane is perfectly right as a consent authority to say, no, I think this is significant. And I don't know whether those of you in private practice have had that experience where you look at the tree and think, well, I wouldn't have said that, but I'm not the decision maker. And so that's one of those things that we collect or we estimate that, you know, I'm less concerned about. I don't have that much worry. If I've got it wrong by one, somebody's going to say, hey, that's a significant tree. And if the consent authority says that's significant, we want you to redesign around it, the design team will redesign around it, regardless of what I say. Or they'll head off to court to have the court make the decision. I'm assuming that's sort of what happens in Adelaide, Michael?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've got basic rules based on tree trunk measurements. Does a tree have a trunk circumference of 2 meters or more? Then we have the second test is a range of attributes, which are things that you've been talking about. Quickly, they are character and amenity. They are rare and endangered. They are important habitat value. They are notable visual element in the landscape of the local area. And the problem is that we find, Mark, here in South Australia is it kind of detracts from, well, what are we trying to do here? A tree is a tree. And we get caught up in arguing whether a tree has attribute A, B, C, or D. And sometimes it's subjective, like you're suggesting, Mark, and I agree with you, what I say and what someone else says. So sometimes that can detract from, let's just protect the bloody tree. But it is embedded in our legislation and we have to unfortunately go through that process. So yes, we do have to measure tree height because it contributes to the answer, is it a notable feature in the landscape of the area? Yeah, so
that's great. So again, it's got to be driven by the context in which you work. Certainly my experience is that I don't get hung up on that sort of thing. You know, I put it down, I estimate the significance between low and nil. Nil is a tree that I don't think should be retained. And essential, and my essential trees are trees on neighbouring property, or anything that has historic, cultural, or environmental significance. So stuff that's protected under threatened species and things like that. So they're the ones that are nice and easy for me. It's everything else in between. I don't care if I got it as a medium or a high. It's not so significant. And the other thing is, I'm comfortable with, and it's something that we need to be comfortable with. If it's a preliminary assessment, I'm comfortable assessing a tree as being a tree of high significance and seeing it go. And I'm comfortable with that because that's unfortunately a part of the nature of development, whether we like it or not. I think that development doesn't always value trees as highly when we're particularly when we're doing things like increasing density of land use. Trees tend to get given a lower priority.
I think that my understanding of trees A to Z is that Jeremy Barrell looks at whether a tree is an A tree, a good one, or a Z tree, a bad one. But if it's an A tree, if it's a significant tree, then at some point you may have to make a judgment as to whether the development is more important than the tree. And if you can't do what you need to do with the development and keep it, then which is more important, the development or the tree? So if you've got a gum tree, which would be an A tree according to trees A to Z, it's a significant tree, but you want to build a hospital, well, maybe the hospital is more important than the tree.
Yeah, and that's exactly the way it goes. And the interesting thing there is that's where I say, I might look at it and say, yes, look, it's Sydney blue gum. It's in an area where Sydney blue gum high forest is present, so it's an endangered ecological community. But we're building a residential tower. It's approved for medium density, or it's approved for commercial development. It then becomes not me that says that. I just simply say it's a significant tree. And then it's up to the consent authority to make the decision about how that gets handled, what the way up is. I'm not the consent authority. So
compatible is the retention of the tree compatible with the proposed development? That's about as far as we can go, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Is it conceivable to retain this tree? And I mean, you'll have all seen it at some stage or other, or you definitely will, where things such as a simple flipping the garage to the other side of the property allows for the retention of a tree. Putting the pool on the other side of the property allows for the retention of a tree. Little simple design changes that really have no impact. Sometimes they can. Sometimes those can cause significant impact with things like basics and things like that. But oftentimes little tweaks allow for the retention of a tree. And I can think of a site where I was dealing with a wonderful native species, Eucalyptus longifolia, and it was the only one of its species left in the area. And the question is, do you retain the tree or do you remove the tree? And council said no, and the court, very wisely in my mind, the Commissioner Fakes said, look, let's just simply move the whole building 2 meters forward of the building line and let's retain the tree. The only drawback in that whole proposal was, of course, there was no ongoing propagation, so we still only end up with one of this species left. And I think there's something good about looking at it more holistically than just the same property. But again, that's not my job. That's the consent authority. And, one would hope that consent authorities are starting to put that together and saying, look, let's propagate and let's, replant in the area and that sort of stuff. So at least we get some reproduction occurring again. So we've got this situation where we've gone out, we've done some preliminary information, and we're giving that back to the design team. Ideally, this would happen. And some of you have said, yes, look, this happens more often than not. Sydney-wise, it happens less often than it ever should. But ideally, that is what would happen. And the people that are really responding to that are the design team. So where can we put buildings? How can we tweak things? And they'll often figure that out far quicker than I ever will using CAD. They move things around like it's just a little box and they figure it all out quickly. Michael knows how to do it. I struggle just starting up a draft site. It drives me crazy. So that information, how formal is that as a report, do you think?
Well, it depends. I'll say from a South Australian perspective, well, not South Australian, from my perspective, it depends on the client. If we're dealing with a mum and dad client, they don't want report A, then report B, and then report C. So on a smaller job, for example, I might deal with the client and work out a tree protection zone, and in an email, give them 10 dot points and say, here's your tree A, B, and C that are protected by law. You're required to retain them. Their tree protections are X, Y, Z. I might plot it on a CAD plan for them and say, here, go away, go to your designers, and that's one of your constraints amongst many other constraints. Go and work with that. And that works quite well. And I've got a lot of clients, and Tom might have the same here in Adelaide, that they've learned that don't go to council and you've got your design sorted and you've got your bench top colours picked out, because it's only going to get thrown back at you. So we've created really good relationships with lots of designers now that they come straight to us right at the get-go. What are our constraints? And so what I'm saying here, Mark, is that we might start with just basic email information. Here are your constraints. Here are your design parameters. Let's work together. And then we might do one big finished report at the end to help the client save time and money. Conversely, we might have very large scale developments where we might break it up into 1 preliminary, 2 ARB impact assessment report, 3 tree protection plan report.
Okay. And that's interesting, and we'll get to that. Won't get to it today, but we'll get to that one of our future ones, as to whether those last 2 documents always go hand in hand or not. And again, it does very much depend on the environment. We have some councils that will approve a development and then ask for the tree protection plan to be done. And I always get confused about that, because I'm sitting there thinking, I want to tweak, and I can't, because you've approved it. So, you know, all I'm doing is simply saying, for the design that you've got, this is all you can do, which is less desirable in my mind. But so yes, exactly. It doesn't need to be a complex formal document, I guess, is the point of it. It can be anything from so we give a tree schedule, and that's how we, and I assume a lot of you will put your data together in some form of a table or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever you use. I know Peter uses some wonderful piece of Mac operating system type stuff. But I use
it's compatible with it is compatible with your PC as well, Mark.
A table, good. So yeah, a table that's got species. I don't put common names in very often. Sometimes I do. 9 times out of 10, it's just a species. I know what the common name is for tree 1, Eucalyptus pilaris. Does everyone know what its common name is?
Yeah.
Tree 1. Why? I have done enough court cases. I have dealt with enough builders and developers that blackbutt might get there, but tree 1 always does. So I'm less concerned. The only reason I want formal name is from identification point of view, to make sure that it is or isn't something of critical species. So again, common name is one that I would happily leave out, and I'd call every tree dog shit tree as a common name if I could, just to be annoying. So you can call it whatever you like as a common name, and that would get rid of the snappy gums, the brittle gums, and the I'm going to kill you gums, which seem to have got into our vocabulary. So yes, we've got the name, some dimensions. We've got some indication of tree protection sizes, or some information about that, depending on, as Michael says, your target audience. If you're dealing with an architect or a draftsperson, they're more than capable of plotting 12 times trunk diameter. They're more than capable of plotting. We have a minimum tree protection zone. We say, don't go any smaller than this. This is really pushing it tight and will require a lot of arboricultural impact. At 12 times, you'll have no arboricultural input that's required. So weigh those 2 up. You could be spending, $20 or $30 or $50,000 on an arborist, or you could be spending, $10 or $15,000 coming up with a better design. Figure out which way you want to spend your money. I'm happy to have you waste it. So that's the basic tree protection material. I'll also give them some basics on what they might need to do to protect the trees, so that they understand how that's going to impact on it. And just in terms of basic things, you're going to need some form of ground protection, some form of protection of the root area that you're talking about, fencing, those sort of things will get fed back to them at that stage. So that's the preliminary tree assessment. And you've probably seen by now that there's going to be a fair divergence in that information. That is, we're going to rate trees differently using different methods. We're going to identify them. Hopefully, we're going to identify them with the same genus and species. Can we agree on that? Trunk diameters. Hopefully, we're right on anything that's close to a building. Would you agree on that? I mean, diameter tape, pair of calipers, 23 centimeters is the width of my span. I mean, I can get pretty close with two of those. I know we've got 45 centimeters, are close enough there. You know, we shouldn't have huge errors in DBH. And in fact, that's what Craig Hinton in his assessment told us, that Arborist, the best thing that we're good at is estimating DBH. Michael, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. There's things that we shouldn't get wrong, and those sorts of basic things are pretty stock standard. I've just got a question that I want to put out to everyone who's on tonight. My personal view is tree protection zone is defined in the Australian standard as 12 times DBH. But I know of arborists, and I'm not naming names, but who use modified calculations according to an old Matheny and Clark method, 6 times, 9 times, 12 times, 15 times DBH. Now, my personal view is we have standard calculation, 12 times DBH, then we can consider the impact and the levels of encroachment by considering section 3.3.4 TPZ encroachment considerations. So my question is, do people agree with 12 times DBH, or can we vary the calculation of the TPZ at the start?
Can I have a go? Because this is one of those questions that's will go before the committee. 12 times is great. What it says at 12 times, and a 10% encroachment, by the way, which means 8.4 times if you're a tangent on one side. So if I'm constructing beside a building on one side only, and the tree's there, 8.4 times trunk diameter to the edge of the building, and there's a minimum encroachment. The standard says that if that's what you're doing, you don't need an arborist. So here's my point. You're not worth paying for if you can't get closer than that. That's our job as an arborist. It's the only thing we're paid for, figuring out how to deal with minor and major encroachments. Other than that, an architect could well and conceivably say, there's one tree, I know it's a Sydney blue gum, we're 12 times trunk diameter, we can put a fence around that and we're compliant. Don't need an arborist report. And they'd be right. I mean, some councils in Sydney still require an arborist report in that situation, that's fine. So the 12 times trunk diameter is a trigger point. And the trigger point for that is that's the point at which the arborist needs to start doing his work.
I disagree in the sense that I don't think that it is possible for other people who aren't arborists to always get that right. So, for example, I often look at reports that have been put together by ecologists, and they often measure the trees at a different height. And then I get surveyors who measure trees, and they don't measure the diameters properly either. So I get information through from those guys, and I've got to chuck it all out, get them to change it all, because it's not actually right.
I would concur with that. Assuming that they've measured the trunk correctly, and they're at 12 times trunk diameter, we're not needed. That's what the standard says. And so realistically, our role is to go beyond just 12 times trunk diameter. So I've got a question to go back the other way for Michael, and that is, if I'm going to transplant a tree, let's say I've got a nice big fig tree and I'm going to transplant it with, let's say, a standard transplant for a fig, maybe 4 to 5 times trunk diameter radius, so 8 to 10 times trunk diameter total for the root plate. Can I do that under the Australian standard?
It's an interesting point, Mark. I remember we had a conference many years ago, a Dutch lady, Annemiek van something or other, and I asked her exactly the same question, and it was an interesting discussion.
And so the answer is, can I do it? Because, I mean, I know that, for example, when they moved the Buckland Yew, which was, I think, in 1880, they moved it, it had a 2.4 metre diameter trunk. They moved it with a 5 metre by 5 metre root ball, so a little bit smaller than the Australian standard. The tree was only about 1,200 years old at the time, so it was a young tree. In 1900, I've got a photograph of it. It looked very good. It lost a limb in 2007. I'm guessing eventually it'll stress. It lost a limb because it got overweighted and grew too much. You know, that was only a 97% encroachment. And my argument is that if you treat 12 times trunk diameter as absolute, that is, you can't get any closer than that in most circumstances, there's a problem. The problem is that good scientific rigor says anything that's got a 97% error is not a valid formula. It's just simply a trigger point. And so I come closer than that all the time.
But the standard says that you can
yes, absolutely,
major encroachment, provided you can demonstrate the tree will remain viable. That's all you've got to do. Exactly
what it says. And so that's a part of it. So Matheny and Clark had that system because it was intelligent. You know, to say, look, young trees, some species, you can do a lot more, you can get a lot closer. Well, that's what we now need to demonstrate under 3.3.4.
How do other people justify encroachments into structure? Can you encroach in your structural root zone? And how do other guys justify it?
The standard says, yes, you can encroach in the structural root zone. And the first thing to realise is that Maddox's structural root zone equation is an indicative equation as to when you need to start thinking about the impact of root severance. It is nowhere near a prediction of failure. And he makes that very clear in his publication. So he makes clear, for example, that heart-rooted and tap-rooted trees, the impact of cutting is less significant. And Smiley did a wonderful piece of research where he showed cutting at 3 times trunk diameter only caused minor changes in the stability of the tree, barely perceivable. And that's the same as Hamilton had come up with in the 1980s. So what we get is this 3 times trunk diameter is closer than this Maddox equation. But then you get Smiley say, look, on some species, we were to go all the way up to the trunk and cut half the roots off circumferentially around the tree. And a number of those trees didn't fail. What was really interesting in that is those trees that did fail, and I love this, the trees that failed in wet weather failed towards the cut roots. That is, roots help support the tree, amongst other things, in compression. So sinker roots or a tap root, and you've all seen, and we say that trees don't have sinker roots, and we say that trees don't have tap roots, but you know, probably 80% of our eucalypts have sinker roots, and significant sinker roots. So they're there, and they affect stability. One of the things that you may want to do is avoid cutting large roots, and that's that process of going around and doing some root exploration. And got a little note, Michael, do you mind if I share some of the stuff that you...
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so Michael said, let's start using standard terminology. And one of the things that I've observed recently, just because I've become anal about it, is this use of the term root mapping. Root mapping is the end result of a spatial assessment of roots. Root exploration is what the standard calls for, not root mapping. It says you may produce a map. The purpose of exploration is to find out what's there. And so finding out what's there doesn't mean you need to do a map. You might find two roots of 10 inches in diameter or 200 mils in diameter. That might be or 250 mils in diameter. That might be what you communicate. And you may say, look, between those two roots, there's no root greater than 1 centimetre, and that's where we're going to put our footing. So yes, you can do things within the structural root zone, absolutely, including cut roots. I've got one as a challenge. Again, it'll go back to, it was Steve, wasn't it? Steve, I've got a beachfront property in Sydney, and a seawall's going in. I've got a lovely Araucaria. It's about 60 years old. And we either have to remove it, or we're going to have to come to 2 meters away from the base of the tree. Should we remove the tree, or should we retain it and get close to it? What do you think?
Let's do some root investigations first.
Yeah, no, there's an old wall there, lots of old boulders, going to be impossible to do.
It's an Araucaria, of course you should retain it. 2 metres, that's a long way from an Araucaria.
I've got pictures of 1 metre away from Araucarias at Manly Corso in 1985, and unfortunately those trees still aren't dead. I took photographs because I knew they were going to die, because that's what we're told back then. That'll kill the tree for certain. Araucarias produce lots of sinker roots, very tolerant of root damage. Would I prefer to have 3 metres or 4 metres? You bet. But if I had a choice between keeping the tree and not keeping the tree, Kath will tell you that tree's staying. Is that right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I told them I've got a gun pointing at it. Don't kill my tree. So yeah, here's that interesting dilemma where should we as arborists be pushing in closer and retaining more trees, or should we be saying, look, the house is being built, you're 4 times trunk diameter away from that Araucaria, just cut it down? What do you think?
I find the situation mainly with neighbours' trees, you know, in the neighbouring properties. They're not necessarily good trees, but you've got to be able to justify, you know, your inclusion into the root zone structure.
Neighbouring trees are really, you know, I said to you, that's one that I put in that essential group. And if there's a duty of care I have on a site, those are the ones that give me nightmares. I've got to be absolutely certain that the end result of what I do is not going to cause the tree to enter into a irrecoverable spiral of decline or become structurally unstable. That's my duty. Now, that's a scary one, but it's interesting. Mick Rogers down in Yarra Council when he was there. Is he still down at Yarra, Shane? No, I didn't think so. I thought he'd gone off in private practice or something, joined the bad side of things. Mick was dealing with London plane trees, and they'd get to the stage where they had to do root pruning, and he would prune first order lateral roots at the trunk in wintertime. And said, come springtime, you never noticed that they had the root cut at all. Now, I'm not suggesting you'd want to do that all the time, but there are times when I'd rather do that and retain the tree than to say, oh, look, it's got a root that's, you know, lifting up the front porch. Let's just knock the whole tree down. You know, if I can, I'd rather see a tree retained. So I guess it's a balancing act, and there'll be arborists out there, and I think we all know of arborists that are like that would say, it's just a tree, cut it down. You know, 12 times trunk diameter, cut it down. Well, sorry, we're at 8 times trunk diameter, cut it down.
I think what sometimes gets forgotten about is that if you do prune a root on a tree and prune it, and even prune it fairly close to the tree, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's it for that root. They regrow, and the subsequent growth from a pruned root is enormously fast.
Yeah, oh, look, I agree. You know, essentially, you know, we're screwing them up when we transplant them, and that's one of those things that does happen. So, and Peter, maybe next block round, you might like to share some of your work on the role of excavators versus clean cut. And Peter's done some really good trials that show that excavator snapped root, not torn, but snapped, actually can put on more root mass than a cleanly cut root, which is, again, has some common sense in that you're increasing surface area of the break, and therefore you slightly increase the root production. Is that a fair summary?
That's pretty close to it. And yes, I have just completed a 2-year project on looking at those differences. And, you know, it definitely shows that you get a better regrowth or growth response from the snap roots than the cut roots. And it seems to me, although, you know, I think more research would need to be done to prove that it's because the roots don't normally produce new side roots just out of the normal root. But what I could see is that where the roots were broken and cracked, that's where we were getting new root growth emerging from. Whereas a cut root, it really only had the very end of the root that it was easily producing. So it was definitely the case that we got a much better response from the snap root than the cut.
So you guys will be happy about that.
Look, again, what you don't want to do is tear the roots. And so there's a difference, and that is you don't want to be lifting roots up and ripping them out of the ground or having them split all the way up long ways. That's not a desirable end result. But, you know, it's an interesting proposal, and we're at the stage where we're still learning. You know, we're still trial and error. And I remember the very first tree protection lecture I went to was in 1987, and given by a guy called Don Blair. And Don made very clear on that trip that the one most valuable thing and the most valuable tool I'd ever get as an arborist was what?
Reciprocating saw.
Camera. And to this day, I have 100 and something thousand images. And so when people say to me, oh, you can't do that, I just love it, because, you know, I've got examples of where things have happened, where things have not been right, where, you know, all sorts of things happen in development. And I've got development sites, as I said, going back to 1987 that I've got photographic records of. And that's really a valuable tool. You want to know what's going to happen? When you're driving down the road, you're driving past, for us, it's Sydney Water, our water supplier. They're really good and gentle with roots. I'm sure it's the same in Melbourne and Adelaide. A pipe bursts and they just rip up the root system, tear things open, and you get horrors. Like I've been past a Angophora floribunda, almost a metre diameter trunk and a metre away from the tree. There they are digging away. And 15 years later, I can't see what's wrong with the tree. And I'm sitting there thinking, damn it, you know, that wasn't meant to be like that. And the more times I go, damn it, the more I realize that trees really, and I'm going to anthropomorphize, I'm not meaning to say that they do, but trees really want to live. They've got incredibly strong inbuilt survival mechanisms, which means when I see trees declining on a development site, my general view is the builder's really working at trying to make them die.
Mm-hmm.
It takes effort. It's not just oh boy, we ran the truck over that spot once. You know, it's run the truck over it, trench it, put the concrete over it. And then there's that horrible chemical that I use to stimulate roots with. And I got consent recently, and I was talking to a client about it. I said, got consent to use it, killed 59 people last year, but I've got permission to use it on your site.
Water.
What was that, Peter?
Water.
Water, yeah. Yeah, people drown every year. People get steam burns and die, but I can use water and it stimulates roots. And it's just amazing that that's one of the equations is, what are we doing in terms of irrigation? What are we proposing to do? So if you cut roots, that's harming a tree. How do you compensate? And water is one of the main things of compensation. And again, the standard is silent on it. It's one of those things that it really needs to think about is, yes, okay, do we need it looking some form of irrigation, and how do we implement that in the process? And I know that all of you have been through those situations recently where there's been a big drought in your area. Development site work in a drought has much greater impact on a tree than development site during good times. And I know that a number of you have been to Auburn Council's car park with me and seen what happens when you cut 2 times trunk diameter away from a big heritage Moreton Bay fig down 1.5 stories and catch some stormwater and simply reuse the stormwater as a part of the irrigation of the tree. And the tree went from a canopy that was already at 30 or 40% before we started the project, recoverable decline, and the tree today has 100% canopy and looks spectacular. So water is one of those things that will hopefully, or the role of irrigation will be one of those things that we look away at more in those 3.3.4. I think 3.3.4 needs really beefing up. There are lots of other things that we need to consider. As I said, phenology is another one. So the timing of the year that you do things needs to be included in there. There's a list of things that I think we've already got. So that's the preliminary stage. That's the communication. Can you have major encroachments? Yes. Can you encroach in the tree protection zone? Yes. Can you encroach in the structural root zone? Yes. Like Peter and like Michael have said, your job is to demonstrate, if you're going to say that the tree is going to remain viable. And demonstrating that is an interesting process. What we do know that 12 times trunk diameter, and there's some work out of it by a New Zealand arborist, work done in Florida, but New Zealand arborist, that shows that there is a perceivable impact at 12 times trunk diameter on growth if you make no supplementary action. But that's unlikely to be of any real significance longer term, so that you see a reduction in biomass production. So that's the 12 times trunk diameter, and people ask me, what am I happy with? The answer is, yeah, I'm really happy with 12 times trunk diameter as a threshold. If you've got 12 times trunk diameter, it's pretty damn hard for a construction company, they fence that off, to have any real impact on the tree. Could we all agree with that?
Mm. Yeah,
So,
provided that they actually do fence it off.
And keep it fenced off, yes. I mean, and
toolbox the other trades, that's the biggest problem. Toolboxing the other trades on site.
It's everybody on site. Yeah, part of
huge issue.
There's a little bit in the Standards Australia standard that says the tree protection plan or the tree protection area should be shown on all the relevant plans. In Sydney, I've never seen it. It may happen in Melbourne, it may happen in Victoria, it may happen in South Australia, but our plans are approved, and the arborist's report is there. The arborist will have a tree protection plan attached to it, but that plan or that drawing isn't overlaid on the electrical drawing. So the electrician's asked to do a quote, and he gets given a set of drawings. There's the power connection point, and he draws a straight line, and he goes to install it, and he comes out with his trencher, and the builder says, whoa, can't do that. He says, well, that's what I priced you on. It's going to cost you another $7,000 for us to, horizontally bore and so on. And then at that stage, Steve, the builder says, well, stuff it, dig through.
Every day.
So one of the things that the other side of the equation is we need to help our consent authorities really get to the stage where they start to ask for, hey, those plans are good, but reissue us with new plans with the tree protection plan indicated on the appropriate drawings, so that all parties see it. And that's what the standard suggests that we should do.
Sorry, can I ask a question, please?
Sorry?
Yeah, this is Colin from Tasmania. I just got a question.
Yeah, go.
Do arborists ever get involved with setting up fencing for tree protection zone, or is that usually left to the building company to organize?
It's usually a builder's labourer that puts it up. And we all know how many fence panels are required. It's usually 3. So you can construct a triangle. Even though the plan will show more than that, 3 is pretty good. I have been to a site where there was 2, and I thought that was phenomenal. And I shared it with a class, and the students said to me, I know how they do that. They put the fence panel on the excavator, and they put the bucket on it, and they bend it. And they had 2 rounded fence panels that went around the trunk of the tree. The number of times I go out to a site and see the correct area fenced off, maybe 5% of the time. I don't know how that's like for other people.
So collecting evidence for like compliance of a tree protection plan, is that ever in the program in terms of the whole process from beginning to end?
Sorry, say that again.
Collecting evidence for compliance of a tree protection program.
Yeah, look, I seldom see, particularly now that we've gone in New South Wales to the use of a lot of private certifiers. Usually what I see is maybe something right at the very beginning at the demolition stage. The fence is all in place. And then the next time you drive past, the fences have all gone, and you get a phone call at the end of the development saying, we need someone to sign off on this. That's the best we get. It's rare that we get anything better than it. Probably of the sites that I've done reports for that are going ahead at the moment, I'd say 5% of them are having some form of inspection done. 95% just ignore the inspection requirement.
How many compliance certificates have you ever issued?
In terms of, as an arborist, I don't get to do much of that. As a consent authorities, some of our consent authorities will pin, but most of them, almost all of them won't issue a pin for a breach.
Yes.
I reckoned a while ago that if I could pick up half of the penalty infringement notice in Sydney, which is I think 3,000 for an individual, 6,000 for a corporation at the moment. If I could get half of that, I could make myself a millionaire in 2 years, and I'd have to buy bulletproof glass for the front of my house. So I reckon they shoot at it. But it'd be so easy to just drive through a local government area and say, that's not compliant, that's not compliant, that's not compliant. I did a court case recently in a Sydney council area. The trees that they were looking at, complaining about the development going near, and diagonally across the road, you can see a development going ahead that's not compliant. Up the road, about 5 or 6 houses, there was another development that wasn't compliant. It's, you know,
yeah,
it's
the
a hard
consent
one.
authorities don't. They're not continual. They don't enforce anything past the original report.
It's not like Shane might like to be able to go and do that sort of stuff.
No.
Yeah, Shane.
In Melbourne, the responsible authority, the local council, issues planning permits, and as I said, you know, it's slightly different everywhere we go. It's increasing that there's a self-reporting mechanism in those planning permits that in a tree protection management plan must be approved by the council before the development starts, and that on request, the signed off stage certification of the arborist, and the developer is meant to employ an arborist during the construction process, and that at any time the council can come along and ask for the certified staged site inspections of the arborist. So tree protection fencing up prior to construction, at stage 1, at stage 2, at stage 3, prior to landscaping at the end. And that process is in place, whether it's followed or it's not. The responsible authorities enforcement team, depending on their resources and ability, follow that up or they don't. But getting back to Colin's original question, that's causing a market for arborists or tree companies, arboricultural companies in Melbourne, to install the tree protection fencing and to manage the tree protection fencing and to regularly attend the sites. That when the responsible authority or a regulatory agent requires an organisation, an industry to do things, and it's, go back to the most simplest, asking for fences around the street tree during the construction process was something before that was a consistent practice with local councils before your Australian standard came into place to look at the rest of the trees on on-site and neighbouring properties. That becomes a standard practice for a local government area, and the major builders that build in that area, it's just something that they start doing. And then you see that permeate out into other councils that don't have those regulations, because those major builders, just their standard process for all sites, have the fencing on the street tree to begin with, even when they don't not required by any regulation to fence the nature strip tree. Then when they're becoming more and more involved with inner urban developments, where tree protection on site and an arborist informing their reports or their construction and their design stages, becomes a constant practice, it starts to permeate. And now we're getting to the stage where we've got significant size construction companies, those major builders, they're going and getting site inspection reports and impact assessment reports from arborists where there's no legal requirement for them to do it, because it becomes a standard constant practice. And I don't want to sort of bang on too much about that, but it's just said, you use the standard, and industry adopts a standard. The regulatory agent asks for that, requires that, and it starts to permeate through. And hopefully it's used where the regulation requires it to be used, but it starts to permeate to where it's not required to be used, because that's just what they do every time they do something.
Yeah, I think there's the other side to that certainly we see in Sydney, and that is you get a guy that does things right. You'll get some guys that are really great to deal with, and I've got 2 or 3 builders that fit into that category. But a lot of builders are almost rewarded for not doing it. That is, the fences aren't up, they're not renting it, and they learn to take the punt on it. And they say, oh yeah, that's in Shane's council. He's really a pain in the ass, that guy, you know. And so they're almost rewarded for not complying. And that's what we're seeing in Sydney. It's hard. One of the things that I have seen, and I'll give credit to Baulkham Hills Council because it's not, or the Hills Council as it is now, on a number of sites, I've been asked to demonstrate that, or the client's been asked to demonstrate that they've engaged an arborist for the term of the works, a project arborist for the term of the works, and have a formal contract for the inspections. And that's the only time I've had it work well, when I know that I'm going to get paid and my job is to report, and my job is to report non-conformances. They've got to authorize me to provide non-conformances. Otherwise, I get to go out and I say, you've just dug right through that tree protection zone and you shouldn't, and then I can't do anything about it because I've got a privacy and client confidentiality issue with the consent authority. So again, Baulkham Hills Council has, or the Hills Council has required that on several occasions, and that just makes it so easy for me because I know I'm going to get paid, I've got an agreement, and I know I'm going to not get canned. The opposite happens where I go out, I look at the tree protection fence, it's in the right spot. I might even go out and install it. We've got a number of panels here. We've got about 200 odd panels. We'll go out probably on 1% of all times and put the fences up. And I know next time I go past, they'll all be down or be shifted. And that's one of the changes that I personally have asked for in the Australian standard, is the use of temporary footings with fences with concrete blocks is not an ideal solution. I'd rather see a temporary fence with posts in ground rather than see panelled fencing that a beefy boy like Shane or myself can push over with one shoulder.
Better still, a whole lot of ground protection, because they're much less likely to move a whole lot of planks and 6 inches of mulch. If you're looking at those inner urban development sites, a fence is easy to move. A whole lot of planks and mulch isn't.
Yeah.
So it's site specific.
A lot of options there, guys. It is coming up to 7:47. I know we started a little late, but we've certainly gone for an hour. Was that useful for anyone?
Yep. Really good.
Let's continue on with it next time around. Now, Michael Palamountain sent some stuff to us, and I would like to circulate some of that for the next one, just for discussion. He's put a template for Arborist report, for a broadcast impact assessment report. I'll share one with you as well. And again, we'll have some of the discussions about what's involved in that document in our next time round. So, and we'll look at also something that another one of the attendees has asked for, and that's how do you deal with this process of referencing stuff? I'm not going to look at the referencing process. What I'm going to look at is patterns of keeping references so that you can use them. So I use a whole pile of similar references regularly for agricultural impact assessment reports. I've got Smiley, I've got Hamilton, I've got Harris, I've got Matic, I've got, you know, so keep them all in a process, whether you use your words process to do it, whether you use a file to file them in. But we'll talk about how to do that, and we'll start looking at some of those standard ones that we use as a group, and they'll help inform what we do. So I'll see you in a month's time, guys. And by then, those of you in Sydney will almost be out of lockdown.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Nice one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Guys.
Awesome.